Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Profoundly Silly Wisdom, the podcast for people who are ready to start living as their authentic self rather than following all the shoulds. Now, today's question is, are you stuck on the self-improvement treadmill? Another way of putting that is, why is life so hard? So you're the ideal person for this video. If you've been working on yourself for quite a few years, but yeah, basically you might be asking yourself, am I ever going to break through here? Because it feels like however much I achieve, I just never get to the end of this list of things that I need to change and improve and fix about myself. And I'm kind of running out of energy, basically. So I'm sure there are a few people who relate to that. I certainly do. And today, so today's card is the Lover's card. And, basically the Lover's card refers to, if you get this in a reading, it will be something along the lines of you may be meeting a very aligned partner, very, healthy relationship is on your horizon, or you may be in one already, and it's one where there's kind of it's sort of aligned on all levels. So physical attraction doesn't always have to be physical attraction, but it often is. It's often a romantic relationship, but you're also very much, intellectually, emotionally aligned, spiritually aligned even. And also this card sort of refers to values, your personal values. If you look at the card, you can see you've got some figures. So it looks like Adam basically standing in front of a tree which has quite interesting flames on it. So he kind of represents physical desires. Eve is standing in front of a tree, looks like an apple tree, and there's the serpent entwined around it. And then you've got this, it looks like Archangel Gabriel, I believe, who represents the divine. And it's basically referencing the story that I'm sure most of you are familiar with of the Garden of Eden. And that's basically a story about sort of, it's like an allegory of where things went wrong for humanity, where things started to nosedive, and all of this division and chaos came into the world. I'll quickly run through the story and then I'll explain how this relates to being on a performance treadmill. So there is a point, bear with me. So the story is this, that basically God creates the world and within the world, so he creates the plants, obviously he forms the earth and then the plants and then the animal kingdom and creates Adam. So the first human is the story. And then he creates this lovely garden, the Garden of Eden. Obviously, we think of paradise, really, when you mention the word Eden. And he gives the garden to Adam to manage. But he says, it's not good that you're alone. I want to find an aligned partner, which is obviously what this card refers to help you manage this, but also to enjoy living your life, And he looks for, through the animal kingdom and doesn't find a suitable helper and sort of ally. And so he creates Eve. He puts Adam to sleep and creates Eve out of Adam's rib. So not out of his foot or, but out of his side. So that the idea is that they are partners in life. So then he gives them the garden to manage. So, and then this is a beautiful garden. It's full of wonderful, lush vegetation and plenty of food as well, fruit. But he also creates a tree. And this tree is called the Tree of the Knowledge of Good and Evil. It's a sort of interesting, sort of slightly strange name for a tree. But he puts it in the middle of the Garden of Eden. And he says to Adam and Eve, you can eat of all of the trees in the garden, but don't touch, and in this tree, don't touch the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because when you eat from it, you'll die, basically. And so what happens? Well, you probably know the story. The serpent is kind of a sneaky animal and goes up to Eve and said, did God really say you can't eat the fruit from that tree? And she said, yeah. He said, no, you can eat all of the other fruit, but not that. And basically what the serpent does is he sows a seed of doubt in her mind. And what he says to her is, well, okay, so God said you're going to die when you eat that fruit, but actually God just doesn't want you to know everything. He doesn't want you to have the knowledge, because if you do, you'll become like God. Basically, you'll take over. You won't need him telling you what to do. Is kind of that's my paraphrase. It's it's implied, but not overtly stated. So he's, and then she looks at the tree and the fruit, and so she looks at it. It looks really juicy, and decides, oh, I'm going to have it. And so she takes some of the fruit from the tree. She gives some to Adam, who makes no complaint about it and just shoves it in his face, basically. Again, Esme paraphrase. And so they both disobey the divine directive, I guess, the word of God. And what happens instantly is that they suddenly feel, I suppose they've been imbued with knowledge, and they suddenly feel self-conscious. And they're like, oh, we're naked, as you can see in the picture, in case you don't know what a naked body looks like. They sort of become self-conscious, and they feel a measure of shame. They sort of feel exposed, and so they go and look for some clothes. They sort of make, so the first clothes as well. This is the story of how the first clothes were made. They find some fig leaves and they sew them together and sort of cover themselves a bit as best they can, because this is a new problem for them. Problems are new for them, actually. And then what happens, they hide in the bushes, but God obviously finds out. I mean, he sort of speaks to Adam and says, did you eat from the tree? And basically Adam confesses. And then instantly, so we've had the fear, we've had the shame and the fear, that sort of feeling of being exposed. What happens when Adam feels accused? He says, she made me do it. Sound familiar? And then what happens when God accuses Eve? She says, the snake made me do it. So basically we then have that blame, and there's a lot of blame going on at the moment, and it's what happens when people get triggered. You basically have a choice. You're either going to, you have more than two choices, but if you're in that stress response and you're not really tuned in, you're probably either going to judge yourself to be deficient and feel bad about yourself, which is a horrible feeling, which is why so many of us just lob the blame at someone else. Oh, it's their fault that I'm feeling bad, because we don't want to deal with the embarrassment and the shame that we're experiencing. So that's the story. And as a result of this, they experience a curse. So basically God says to Adam, the ground is cursed. So it's not just them, but also the earth that was created, this pristine earth gets cursed, and now it produces thorns. So it's like you're cursed with hard work. You're not going to it's not going to be so easy anymore. Basically, you're going to have to work really hard to provide for yourself, to provide food for yourself. So you're going to work hard. And also Eve gets cursed with, basically you're going to, give birth in pain. So creating in the world then becomes difficult, whereas before everything was working in harmony. It's just everything just flowed together and there was no division. Now it's like you're going to have to fight to bring anything into the world, anything of worth. And so life goes from this sort of paradise type experience in the story to being a sort of endurance test, a trial. So how does this relate to the question of getting stuck on the self-improvement treadmill? Well, basically the Garden of Eden story sort of demonstrates what happens when our mind gets out of balance. And, so you've got this, if you're experiencing painful self-improvement, like, no matter how hard I try, I just keep, failing, or I fix this one thing, but then 10 other things crop up. If that's your experience of this endurance test of life, if you see what I mean, then it's based on a couple of assumptions, which are obviously mentioned in the story or referenced. And the first assumption is life is hard. Nothing comes easy. This may sound familiar to you, no pain, no gain. Money doesn't grow on trees. So that's one I particularly like. And there's just this notion that there's no ease in life. Everything worth doing has to be hard won. Every victory has to be hard won. So that's assumption number one. Assumption number two is, and there are kind of two things in here really, but I just didn't want to have 3 points for some reason. So the assumption number two is that there's this real and separate self, if you like, self that needs to be improved. So what does that mean? First there's an assumption that that the self is real. That's the first thing. And then the other half of that is that there's something wrong with the self. It's like the shame that they felt. There's something wrong with me, whereas before everything was fine. They didn't feel ashamed of not having clothes. Not having clothes wasn't a problem until they ate of this tree of knowledge of good and evil. So Eve is basically she represents our conditioned mind, our individuated mind, which feels separate from everything. And it feels separate from everything because it has a very individual point. If you ask most people, oh, where is your mind? We'll point to our heads, and we'll sort of imagine it's kind of in our brain somewhere, or sort of behind the eyes is often the way that question gets answered. When they ask it in sort of psychological tests and things. And it's basically, we have this sense of being confined in a body, to a specific point in space-time. It's a certain time, we're subject to time, we only have so much of it, we are in a body, I can't drift into someone else's body, and there's this sense of being physically separate from everybody. And so I don't know what's going on in your mind, you don't know what's going on in mine. And when we're living from that very individuated place, and feeling separate from everything and everyone, it's very easy to become afraid because there's so much you don't know. When you're in one specific point in space-time, there's so much that's unknown to you. Look at all the stuff that's happened. Who would have imagined we would be in lockdown after a massive pandemic? We didn't predict a lot of the things that happened. And I think, so a lot of people are very much in that sort of triggered sense of separation and I don't know what's happening next. And also information overload, definitely. So that's what happens in the story. So, because it's like she eats of that tree of knowledge, too much knowledge. It's almost like all of the knowledge that we get bombarded with through the internet, social media, the news outlets, billboards everywhere, and just constant streams of data, aside from the data that we need simply to function, to navigate in physical space-time. If you think about all of the data that our bodies are gathering at any time to regulate our temperatures and all of the sophisticated elements of keeping a body functioning. So our systems just can't handle, there's just a point at which, and especially our conscious mind just cannot handle that much information. So when we are assailed with it, we take on, like she ate the apple, take on a huge amount of data. It's just like, oh, I can't handle this. And now I feel insecure. Why? Because you've taken on too much information, basically. So that's kind of what happens. And then, and it's interesting, it's called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because that's what happens. Like when we get triggered, our only way, and overwhelmed, because we're coming from this very sense of separation, very individuated sense of self. We start judging everything as good and bad because we're in our survival mode. We're trying to work out whether, we don't know what's happening next. You have to work out whether something's safe or not. What's the right decision to make here? Will I end up in another situation where I'm in trouble, or I need to do this in order to stave off disaster, so when you're in that fearful triggered place, you judge, and then everything becomes good or bad, and then what do? We throw that out at each other. Anyone think that there's a bit of judgment being flung around at the moment? Possibly on social media and even in the news. It's all blame, it's all shame, blame, judgment. And that's what happens when we live out of this very individuated self, and I'm calling it self because, as we're going to discover, we are more than that simple individuated experience of selfhood. There's more to us. So we become overwhelmed with too much information. So if Eve is the individuated mind, if you like, that's got overwhelmed with too much information, and our bodies are coping with all of the information as well. So Adam represents the body. As I said, he was in front of the tree with the little flames on it, representing desires of the flesh. Probably is a very religious sounding way of putting it. So Adam represents the body. So then what does the angel Gabriel figure represent? Well, I suppose God, the divine, really. I mean, obviously it's God in the story, not angel Gabriel, but that's that's the representation of the divine in this card. And so the Archangel Gabriel represents our intuitive mind, which you might call our soul. So what is the intuitive mind? Well, unlike the individuated mind, our conditioned mind, or our human mind, as we would call it, the intuitive mind or intuition is non-local. So what does that mean? That means it's not fixed in one point in space-time. So you see, the way it works is our individual sense of self, this self behind our eyes that's separate from the 8 billion other selves, the human selves, we're not counting the animals here, of course. That feeling actually comes, that sense of selfhood and individuation actually comes from a few cells in our left brain hemisphere. So if you've ever heard the story or read the story of Jill Bolte Taylor, who was the Harvard neuroanatomist, try and say that quickly after a glass of wine, the Harvard neuroanatomist who had a stroke, and it basically knocked out part of her left brain hemisphere, and so she completely lost her sense of being in a body, and she felt herself as being expanded, and she basically didn't know where she, as in physical Jill, began and where it ended, because she just had this sense of being part of everything. And that is actually the truth. Fundamentally, everything is energy. Even this card is energy. Everything in the universe is energy. And basically what gives it a sense of being separate is that it's energy held together in clumps, that we call matter. But essentially everything is energy. And so in a very real sense, we are a field of energy, a field of consciousness nested in other fields of energy. So we're like in this, it's like the drop. It's like we're the tiny drop in the massive ocean of the universe. And basically you can't really distinguish between them particularly, but we have that individual sense of self because, there's a part in our brain that helps us to, keep within the confines of the body and have an individual mental experience that's separate from others. But the reality is that we're all connected, when we're in our intuitive mind. And that's kind of what, people who are practiced at meditation, for example, what they're referring to when they have that kind of oneness consciousness, that sense of unity. And again, it's kind of going back to the story, everything is functioning as a whole. There's no division because no one feels separate. No one suddenly feels they're naked and exposed, because they're the drop in the ocean and everything flows together. But obviously when we have this individual experience that we get in a physical body, our mind creates this illusion of being separate so that we can have individual experiences. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have a self, and I'm not trying to get rid of your self. So don't worry. But basically that's where we get a bit stuck, because when we try to live our whole life out of that part of our mind, rather than tapping into the huge expanse, our soul expands way beyond the confines of our body and is connected into all that is. And so our soul has much better visibility than we do of what's coming. And not only that, it doesn't experience itself as separate. So when Jill Bolte Taylor was having her stroke, even though she knew, on some level, oh, this is a physically, potentially fatal condition or experience that I'm having, and she managed. It took quite a lot of effort, because obviously she was having, she didn't have her normal sort of sense of individuation with her, so she couldn't easily manage the situation. But she didn't have that fear, because on the fundamental level she knew that she's actually part of everything. And that's the mind that you want to be tapping into more often than not. So what happens? Oh, I was going to say also, if you don't like the religious reference, another way to look at it is that Adam, so the body, Adam is the car, Eve, the mind, the individuated mind, is the backseat passenger, and Archangel Gabriel, the intuitive mind, is the driver. So basically when you're trying to run everything, when you're trying to run your life from your individuated mind, you're basically like the passenger sitting on the back seat trying to grab at the wheel and say, I need to be in control, I need to drive this vehicle, when actually your soul is sitting in front, has a much better view of what's happening, of everything. And if you knew this, you could sit back and relax, and you think, okay, I don't have to do the job of the driver. I can let the driver drive the car. And then when I need to know something, because there's something coming up and I maybe need to make a decision, need to go somewhere particular, or, that kind of thing, then my soul will let me know. Instead of me thinking, I've got to control everything because I don't know what's going to happen and I don't know if I'm going to survive. So that's another way of looking at this. And this is what we do to ourselves, when we're living out of this individuated mind. The reason we feel vulnerable and exposed is because if we are not connected into our intuitive mind, we don't have the visibility. Also, we don't have the capacity to handle all of that data. So that is the reason we get sort of overwhelmed, because we're just trying to control everything when we were never designed to. Actually, we're designed to sit in the back seat, listen to a bit of music or whatever it is you want to do in the back seat. Maybe close your eyes and chill out, meditate or something. But yeah, and sort of enjoy the view. When people talk about living in the moment, bloody annoying, isn't it? When you're stressed and something, just be in the moment, and you're like, yeah. But when you're relaxed, when you know that your soul's in control, you can be in the moment. You don't have to try and every second of the day, utilize in order to keep your car on the road, because your driver's taking care of that. So what happens when we live from our intuitive mind? We let the soul drive the car. Relief is the first thing. We have a sense of peace because we, not only, I've talked a lot about overwhelm, but not only do we not experience the overwhelm because we can let the driver do the job, we can let the intuitive mind control our life rather than us trying to do it from our, narrow perspective. But also we feel relief because finally we actually connect in with our authentic self. We no longer have that sense of there's something wrong with me, because I've actually connected into my truest nature. And why do I say truest nature? Well, because obviously at some point we die, sorry if you'd forgotten about that and I've just reminded you. But we all know, life on earth as the person I am now is not going to last forever. And so, when the body, when we release the body, if you like, we release also the persona that we have been, the character that we've been playing on the stage of life, as Shakespeare would have put it. But we basically never lose our intuitive mind, because it is part of that wider field. We are a field of consciousness, and it has all of the intelligence, access to all of that intelligence. But so it's huge peace, because we suddenly are in tune with our true nature. And that feeling that we get, that the story really is about the disconnect that happens in our identity, and how we get taught to live out of this identity and try and control everything. We just create a billion rules to try and control ourselves and control everyone else, because we're just afraid. But when we connect to our intuitive mind, our soul, then suddenly we can relax and we come into alignment with our true nature, which is why this card also refers to alignment, with your values. So that takes me on to the other thing. Not only do we have access to the wisdom of the soul, which is vast, and the computational power of the soul, which is vast, but also, we also have the knowledge of the soul. Again, we're not trying to know it all for ourselves in our individuated mind. We've got, because our soul is connected to us anyway, even if we don't realize it. But our soul knows, basically our intuitive mind knows our truest desires, our deepest desires. And again, when you're coming back to law of attraction, the reason why so much of that stuff doesn't work is because we're trying to do it out of our individuated self. We're trying to manifest money because we're terrified we're going to run out of money, and so much of our desires are basically based on fear. But actually our soul knows what really makes us happy. Our soul knows our true values. So you don't have to do what I did and spend several years going for a job that you think is your ideal job, and then you discover it's a nightmare. You can avoid that one. So yeah, that's what happens when you know about this fellow. You connect to your true self. So where have we got to? So yeah, your soul also knows the blueprint. So it doesn't only know you intimately, in terms of what makes you tick, much more intimately than a partner will ever know you. Your soul also knows the plan, if you like, the blueprint for your life, the purpose that you have for being here. And so by tuning into the divine mind, if you like, or your intuitive mind, you're connecting into your purpose. So many of us have felt, I'm not living my purpose. So we might not even know what that really means at some level, but we have this sense of disconnection. But when you connect into your intuitive mind, you're also connecting into your purpose, the purpose that you have for having this individuated experience. And so, yeah, basically the more we build a relationship with the intuitive mind, with our soul, the more we recognize and release these false assumptions that we have. Does life really have to be difficult? Well, it is if you're living out of this bit, but if you're getting this one to handle life, suddenly the challenges don't seem so scary because I don't have to handle them all, behind my eyes, if we put it that way. So yeah, we can relax more. We can feel, more relaxed. We can feel connected to our true nature. We can experience divine guidance. And again, like I said before, if you imagine in the car, the soul driver will tell us, when there's a decision that needs to be made. Oh, should we go this way or should we go that way? we know what we need to know when we need to know it, so that we're not overwhelmed. So then, when we're in that frame of mind, knowing our whole self, our whole self, rather than being cut off from each other, then basically we can live life as an adventure. We can relax and we can enjoy life. And instead of challenges being terrifying because I don't know if I'm going to be annihilated, we can just have that sense of, oh, my soul understands, my soul's got this. My intuitive mind knows it's connected in to the bigger picture and also the unified field. So life goes from being this endurance test, this fearful kind of hard endurance test, this suffering based experience of separation, of mistrust, and fighting against each other. How often do we, when we live from this place of fear, we also fight with our own body. We're not happy with it. We need it to be this. We need it to be that. I'm not feeling what, there's a lot of tension that comes out of, this misalignment. And so we can then go on to experiencing life as an adventure, as an exciting and joyful adventure. So my question to you is, are you ready to start building a relationship with your intuitive mind, with your soul, your authentic self, the authentic self that I've been referring to in all of these videos, so that you can live your life as a joyful adventure rather than a trial and tribulation. So I hope you found that helpful. So if you did, please like the video. It just helps it to spread. I don't have a lot. I'm not really that concerned about how many views I have, in the sense of like the numbers being that meaningful. But what I do want is for people who really need this message to get it. So like it, share it, and subscribe to the channel if you found it helpful. And I will see you on the other side.